Hey yo, what's good? Welcome to my review of Sweet Thunder, The Life and Times of Sugar Ray Robinson. This book is by Will Hayward. Shout outs to Chael L for suggesting this book. He refers to it in some of his videos. So I asked him, is it good? He's like, dude, you'll love it. I'm like, alright. And I did. Definitely recommend this book if you want to know, of course, about the life of the great Sugar Ray Robinson, but to understand his greatness and to understand the era, the tough era that he lived in, where you lost the fight and you came back to freaking win the rematch because you won't let this man hold the win over you. That's the type of era that Sugar Ray Robinson fought in. Alright, this book starts off in Georgia, where Sugar Ray Robinson's father, Walker Smith Sr., he lived there and with wives, and I think he had two sisters. Sugar Ray had two sisters older than him, so he was the youngest. But so it's debatable where Sugar Ray Robinson was born, either Georgia or Detroit, because his dad moved to Detroit because there was a lot of racial violence back in Georgia in those days. Also, yeah, like a bunch of riots and people, race wars. Whites would just invade black neighborhoods and beat up people, invade houses, just because they're black or just because one black person got away with a crime and stuff like that. So Walker Smith Sr. was making $10 a week working in Georgia, and he saw that the Gerald Ford had just made the Model T, and his Ford company, we all know what Ford is. So he looked that up, and it turns out he made $5 a day working in Ford. So compared to making $10 a week, that's a lot more money. So he moved to Detroit by himself, worked there for a while, then got money, sent money to his wife. I forget Sugar Ray's mom's name, my bad, but he sent money to his wife and for his kids to come back. Young Walker Smith Jr. Who's Walker Smith Jr.? Sugar Ray Robinson. He was born Walker Smith Jr. in either Detroit or Georgia. Those who know, let me know, because it wasn't really there. They weren't really sure. It said it's debatable. They say Georgia claims him and Detroit claims him. Because, why wouldn't you? It's the great Sugar Ray Robinson. So they sent money so they could go to Detroit, and there was, surprise, surprise, there was also race wars in Detroit. It got really violent. It said a story about a rich black man with his family. It said a story that he moved into a white neighborhood. And they didn't want him to live there. So they would start. So the white neighbors around, they got together, but to attack him in his own house. So this rich black man, he wouldn't allow it. So he put on his own rebellion in his own home with a bunch of his black friends. So they wouldn't take over his home. Like, he had every right to live his home and defend his home. So he defended his home with guns and all this stuff. And turns out that he shot a white man in the head, and I think he killed him, yeah. And so they were trying to sue him get him for murder, but he was rich, so he got like one of the greatest lawyers he could get. He got one of the greatest lawyers, and he got away with it. So this is when the white people of that area they started to pillage, get into black neighborhoods, beat up people, riots, just stuff like that. It was a tumultuous time. It was a time of racial violence. So Sugar Ray's mom, Walker Smith Jr.'s mom, I should say, she said, "Oh, this is too violent to live here." So she moved Sugar Ray back to Detroit. To Georgia, and he stayed there for a little bit with his grandma, but he stayed there for like 2 years, and then he came back to Detroit. He was a little bit older. He started becoming a troublemaker, hanging out in the streets, and his father wasn't really there ever because he was working, or he was also cheating on his mom. So his mom just couldn't take it anymore. All that cheating, all those lies, all the she's like, "I'm gonna take the kids." So they moved to Harlem, and this is where Sugar Ray Robinson attributes his pretty much all his childhood, where he grew up. I'm looking for his mom's name because that's been bothering me. So, yeah, Layla. His mother's name is Layla. Okay, so Layla moves to Harlem with his two sisters and her son, young Walker Smith Jr. in the cities of Detroit, of Harlem. So these were rough cities. Young Walker Smith Jr. would skip school, hang around the streets, shoot dice, get in trouble, get into fights. So his mom's like worried. She's like, "What am I supposed to do?" One day, this was young Walker Smith's salvation. This is like the moment. This is where Layla Smith, she finds a gym. It's called, in Detroit, Sugar Ray he would go to Brewster Recreation Center, and that's a boxing gym, or they have a boxing program, and he would talk to Joe Louis. He would make contact with Joe Louis. Joe Louis would go there, and that was a bit of some years before he became world champion. So he was already a good boxer, but then his mom moved him to a whole different city, and this is where he became a little bit thuggish, where young Walker Smith Jr. became a little bit thuggish, and his mom found another gym there. It was called Salem Crescent Gym. It was a church, so they started going to this church. It was Salem Methodist Church, and they weren't religious people, but his mom's like, anything that gets him out of trouble. So they started going to church. Walker Smith Jr. starts going into the gym, and he's there, and he's so curious. He loves everything about boxing. He just wants to learn. He asked the coach, George Gainford, which becomes his coach for his whole entire career. And he always asks him questions. He's always curious about learning. He always wants to learn more about boxing, how to become a better fighter. This is his love. He already knows that it's going to be his love for the rest of his life. And yeah, but the Gainford did not want to fight him. He did not ever want to fight him. He's like, he's not ready. So he would go to shows and just watch and ask him more questions because he wanted to fight. So one day, there was nobody. The fighter that was supposed to fight didn't go, and it turns out that Walker Smith was the same weight as him. He was a flyweight, and this is where Sugar Ray Robinson was born. Watch, Gainford would carry around cards just in case, just in case a substitute was gonna come in, or someone that's not expected to fight didn't bring his card to fight, or if they didn't have a card at all, he brought their card with their names on it. Bunch of cards that he had. So Walker Smith Jr. was like, "Oh, I want to fight." He's like, "Man, are you sure? Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes, yes." And so he gave him this card. It was of one Ray Robinson that fought with George Gangford for a while but stopped going. So he gave him that card, and that's where Ray Robinson was born. That fight was a little bit sloppy, but it was his first fight, and Robinson came on top. The now Ray Robinson. So Robinson would continue to learn, and I'm gonna miss a lot of details of this book just because it's so detail filled, guys. It has so much good information. He would keep learning, asking Gangford questions, how to become a greater fighter. In the meantime, he kept fighting in tournaments, winning tournaments. He fought with such elegance and such great footwork and speed and power. This is something Sugar Ray always had, power. And in one fight, a reporter was trying to talk to him, and he's like, "Hey, Ray," and then he said, "Ray, sweet as sugar." No, what did he say? Oh, okay, yeah, I got it. He said, "Man, Ray, that was sweet." And some lady in the back says, "That was sweet as sugar." And this is when that reporter, he wrote, okay, so the headlines after that fight said Sugar Ray Robinson. And Sugar Ray loved that name. He loved it. So it stuck with him for the rest of his life, basically. He kept winning tournaments with dazzling speed, footwork, and power, knocking fools out left and right. And he won the National Golden Gloves, and those were staged in Madison Square Garden. And he filled up the stadium like 40,000 people. An amateur, guys. A Golden Glove champ tournament filled the stadium. And that's where you learned about Sugar Ray Robinson. That's where they learned about him. And they knew he was definitely indeed sweet. So he was a very successful amateur, but George Gangford really didn't want him to turn pro. He didn't think he was ready to turn pro yet. So, but Robinson, he said he was ready. And they eventually turned him pro. And he's a highly successful pro. I think he turned pro in either in the late 1930s or definitely the early 40s. He turned pro, but he was even better in the pros. I think that he was undefeated in the amateurs. It did not mention any losses in the amateurs, just that he was spectacular talent, had beautiful footwork. Like they had never seen a talent like Sugar Ray Robinson. And in the pros, it was the same thing. He's knocking fools left and right, just with this talent, with this multiple talents, guys. And it was then like in 1941 when he was knocking just every contender out. He was knocking them out, beating them easily, and people were in awe of him. People were in awe because they had never seen anything like it. And this here might be a surprise to you. It was a surprise to me. I did not know. Sugar Ray Robinson was drafted into the army, I believe. He was drafted because he was already really popular. He was already gaining fame, and it was already like 1941, 1942 is when he got drafted. And they drafted him and Joe Louis. And the reason that they drafted two famous boxers was because they wanted black people to join the military. They wanted to get support for the military. If you have a role model in the military, you're gonna join. And this was the same with like white artists. They would make them join the army or the military so they could recruit more, so more people would want to join the army. That's why they got Ray Robinson and Joe Louis. So they were already good friends. They knew each other from Detroit, but they would hang out all the time in Detroit. And by this time, people were already pleading that Sugar Ray get a title shot already. But in the Army, he really didn't fight much. He did have exhibitions. He did fight sometimes, but he didn't really fight. So his title plans were sort of put on hold once he was in the Army. But this is something underrated about Sugar Ray. He was a great fighter, but he should also be painted as a social activist. And not in the sense like of a Muhammad Ali, but watch. Sugar Ray Robinson, they would perform exhibitions, him and Joe Louis, and at one of the fights, one of the exhibitions he was going to perform in, he was talking to some of his friends. They were all black, and then he asked him, he's like, "Oh, you guys are going to the show?" They're like, "Nah, we're not." And he's like, "Why? Why not? Are you guys working?" He's like, "No, we can't, because we're black. It's segregated." He's like, "What?" So he said, "I'm not gonna perform until black people could come here and watch me fight." So that was a big problem. Joe Louis like, "Hey man, calm down, Ray," but he was already he was already angry at that. He was angry. He's like, "No, I'm not gonna perform until Negroes are allowed to watch the performances as well." So he did not perform until they allowed it to be desegregated. So black people were allowed to watch him fight. And a few years after he left the Army, it's just a side note, that those, I don't know what, platoons? Yeah, I think they're called platoons. Platoons became desegregated a few years after he left. And there's another incident where they were, Joe Louis and Sugar Ray were waiting for the bus. I think they were going to do an exhibition once again. And Joe Louis went to the bathroom. It turns out it was a white bathroom. And he got out. And then a guard's like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Saying all these nasty stuff. And he's like, "Man, we're both soldiers. We're both soldiers. What does it matter that we're different color? We're both soldiers." He's like, "Yeah, don't talk to me like that." And then he stuck the baton in his ribs, and this is where Sugar Ray took flight. He jumped on him, choked him, and and pulled him down. And then all these other guards wanted to jump in, and Joe Louis jumped in too, and until they sort of split apart. And it said Sugar Ray was ready to start throwing bombs because he had his fist curled up, and this is when you hear other soldiers just like, "Oh no, that's Joe Louis. That's Joe Louis." And then the guard's like, "Oh shit." He's like, "Oh, I'm calling the warden or whatever." He's like, "You're getting in trouble." So they got taken away in a police car and all this, but they got away with it because they did not want bad publicity, because they enlisted Robinson and Joe Louis because to get good publicity, so blacks would join the military. But arresting these men would just get them negative publicity. So they got away with it scot-free. They were both happy about it. But Sugar Ray kept wanting that title shot. He wanted to keep fighting, and he really couldn't keep fighting if he was still enlisted in the military. It was a time of World War II, and championship fights were sort of put on hold during that time. So no one was really champion. If there was a champion, he wasn't really defending it at that time. So he still wanted that shot, and he was upset. And one day, this is just so random. He was playing cards with Joe Louis, and then he thought he won. He was like, "I got 4 jacks." And Joe Louis was like, "Yeah, I got 4 queens." And then he puts the cards down, and Sugar Ray Robinson, he just gets up and walks away. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. He goes AWOL. That's when he goes AWOL. Basically, he just leaves. He leaves. and he wasn't found till like days later in the hospital. And he's like, oh, I fell and I suffered amnesia. To this day, we don't know what really happened. So he suffered amnesia. He fell, going AWOL. He fell and he suffered amnesia. It was like, it's one of the mysterious parts of Sugar Ray's life. Something Sugar Ray really never wanted to talk about. He never wanted to talk about that. So Sugar Ray, after, I think he's like, oh, I'll just do it until it's appropriate. I just do it until it's appropriate for me. So, yeah. So he waited a little bit, and he went back to fighting. he just went back to fighting after that, and it got back to normal until they were investigating what really happened, and those investigations really didn't amount to anything. So nothing. So they didn't press charges on him. Nothing happened to him. He was fine. He was just A-okay. Yeah, scot-free for going AWOL because he did that amnesia thing. And he never said he never wanted to admit it. Military was always a touchy subject for him. And okay, so the time he got out was around 19. Let me check. I believe it was 1944, 45. Yeah, it was like around 1944, and he got out, and his popularity started to grow, and he just started hanging out with fancy people, with the wealthy people. He started making money. Something I'm not a big fan of this book is like it trails off into other people's lives, and other people's lives is cool because it shows you what the story and the time about the times. It says like about the singer Lena Horns, the poet Langston Hughes, Louis Armstrong, Miles Davis, all of whom were friends of Sugar Ray Robinson. It said their story, but I believe it drifted a little bit too much into that. It talked about how Esquire magazine started and how it pretty much made it cool for men to dress up like in suits. It was like a fashion magazine. And how Sugar Ray Robinson would read this book and he would try to emulate it. So he would always be in the streets. He would always be flashy, in suits, carrying a lot of money. He was Sugar Ray. He lived up to the name in every sense of the word. I just don't like how it drifted off to that lifestyle a lot. That's how I feel. I think I lost concentration at times because it drifted off at times like 10, 20 pages or and like, all right. So you sort of start losing interest in that particular subject, and then it brings you back. That's what I liked about that. It does bring you back. So it's very well written, even though it goes off. But Sugar Ray started doing everything to command attention, man. He bought a pink Cadillac, so everybody would know it's him. Everyone would know it's Sugar Ray. He bought a pink Cadillac, and in the ring, savage, knocking fools out, becoming popular, more popular and popular, filling arenas. And until he got his title shot in 1946. So people were talking about him supposed to be getting a title shot in 1941, but he didn't get it until 1946. That's just how times goes. So there was a champion, and he never wanted to fight Sugar Ray. So that guy pretty much vacated the title. So he had to fight Tommy Bell for the championship. And this was a fight between two black men. And that was pretty rare at that time. Tommy Bell versus Sugar Ray Robinson. That was it was a rare occurrence at that time because nobody really wanted to see two black men fight each other. But since it was what it was, they filled up Madison Square Garden. Sugar Ray was extremely popular, like I said, and he fought, that fight, and at first it was looking like Sugar Ray was gonna lose. He got dropped, but he came back around round 6, dropped him, and it was an extremely close fight. But Sugar Ray Robinson came out on top. Sugar Ray Robinson finally got that world welterweight championship that he had so fought for. It was a beautiful moment. In the fights before, it also says like most of the lives of his opponents. Tommy Bell was a poor man. He was pretty much homeless at times, hoboing. So he really had nothing to lose ever in fighting. So we know how those are dangerous opponents. Sugar Ray Robinson, with his wealthy friends, he wanted to start his own bar, or his own hangout night spot is what they called them. He wanted to start his own night spot, so he was working on that his whole training camp for this fight. So people weren't sure if he was actually prepared for the actual fight. But in the beginning, it looked like he wasn't, but it turned out that he did, and he finally got that. He went back to his nightclub with all the ladies and all the flashiness, and all the artists going to his nightclub called Sugar Ray's, and he started a barbershop and a lingerie shop for his wife. So he was made. He was made after that. And also everything in this book is not chronologically. It goes from him winning the title to him fighting Henry Armstrong, which happened before he won the title. It's like it said it that happened in 1943, and it says how Henry Armstrong was one of Sugar Ray's heroes when he was growing up. He would watch him fight. It also says Henry Armstrong's story, his tragic story once it became tragic, but it says what good of a fighter he was. So you learn about other fighters as well, how he grew up in Mississippi and all that, and how Sugar Ray Robinson didn't really want to fight him until Henry Armstrong started talking, and Henry Armstrong was past his prime, but he really wanted to win that title once again. He wanted a title shot, but he just couldn't. He couldn't beat a young Sugar Ray Robinson. Sugar Ray Robinson toyed with him. He, not in a disrespectful manner, but Sugar Ray Robinson, he just pecked him, moved around. At times, they say he could have probably knocked him out, but he didn't have the heart to. He could not knock out one of his childhood heroes. He didn't have the heart for it. So he beat him in a 10-rounder. And there was questions back then if Robinson could pull the trigger, if he had enough to go for the KO. Because what happened before with he had a fight with Jimmy Doyle, and Jimmy Doyle was a good fighter, one that wasn't afraid of anything. And this guy even had support from Jack Johnson and I believe Jim Jeffries. So they both had his back. Jim Jeffries and Jack Johnson, as we know, are legendary heavyweights from back in the day, in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Great fighters. So they had Jimmy Doyle's back. They trained him. But turns out that a year before his fight with Robinson, another fighter, Artie Levine, he knocked out Jimmy Doyle. He knocked him out cold in a scary fashion, and he gave him a concussion. And the doctors said that he should not keep fighting, that he should retire. So Jimmy Doyle did retire for about 6 months. And he retired, came back, had a few fights, and then he fought Sugar Ray Robinson. And this is when Robinson fought him, and Robinson was in the best shape of his life, And one of those, I think it was... No, I'm doing all this from memory, guys. But I don't know what round, but Robinson throws his signature punch, which is, of course, his oh, correction first. Sugar Ray Robinson turned pro in 1931. So in the early 30s. Just a quick correction from that. So he throws his left hook, a beautiful left hook. It's beautiful how Haygood presents this. He presents it like if it went in slow motion, and it was like a beautiful punch. You kind of, you feel like you're there. Honest to God, boom, and he slowly falls down. Boom. And yeah, Sugar Ray celebrates and all that, but turns out he goes back and he hears that Jimmy Doyle's in the hospital, and he goes visit him, and he's upset, he's sad, but turns out that Jimmy Doyle had a brain hemorrhage, and this is where Billy Doyle had a brain hemorrhage, and he dies. He dies from a brain hemorrhage caused by Sugar Ray Robinson. And Robinson, pretty upset, you know. Jimmy Doyle's dream was to get enough money to buy a home for his mother, so she could live there for the rest of her life. So Sugar Ray Robinson, now that Jimmy Doyle was dead, he raised charity money. He fought in charities, right? He fought exhibitions for charities, and he got enough money to buy a house for Jimmy Doyle's mother, and had enough money for her to retire safely. So Sugar Ray, there's really no signs that he lived with that, but he never liked to talk about Jimmy Doyle, and really he you know, in the days that he retired, he loved watching his old fights, but that was one fight that he never talked about, that Jimmy Doyle, and that's one fight that he did not have in his collection, that fight with Jimmy Doyle. So it did haunt him in a way. Then it goes to the Jake LaMotta Wars. Like I said, it's really not not everything is chronological. So then it goes to the Jake LaMotta. It tells the Jake LaMotta story, which is extremely fascinating. I would want to look into that one day. Jake LaMotta, he's son of Italian immigrants. He's son of Italian immigrants, grew up in the rough Bronx, you know, and his dad once gave him an ice pick, and this is the first moment that he felt other people fear him, that he felt other people feared him, and he just felt such a big man. And in his teenage years, he started robbing people, stealing. That's how he got respect. But one time he got caught probably robbing someone, so he went to prison. Not prison, juvenile hall. And this is where he discovered boxing. This is where he became the Raging Bull in jail. So that's the story of Jake LaMotta in a nutshell. He had a rough neighborhood and upbringing, and he was just an angry person. All his life, he was just angry. He never got that anger out of him from his teenage years, you know, being a ruffian in the streets. So he got out and became a fighter, and he was dazzling, you know, in another way. He was the Raging Bull, pressure fighter with a great chin, and he really couldn't get a title shot either. Like Sugar Ray and Jake LaMotta, they both were looking for those title shots, but they wouldn't come. And so Sugar Ray Robinson, being the legend that he is, even before he won the title, he stepped up to middleweight because he couldn't get a title shot at welterweight. So So he stepped up and he went to middleweight to fight Jake LaMotta. And Jake LaMotta is a big dude. He was basically a light heavyweight for those times. A light heavyweight like 168, 165. He would fight in those weights because basically he was a light heavyweight. So this fight, the first of their fights was at middleweight, and Sugar Ray Robinson pretty much danced around, outboxed him, he schooled him. He won the fight, and he won the first fight. But that's when the legendary rivalry that was Robinson LaMotta was born in their first fight. And there were people that booed. That was at Madison Square Garden that weren't happy with what happened. LaMotta said that they robbed him. They never gave him a fair shot. And he did have a rough upbringing in the fight game too, because he never wanted to sell himself to the mob. He never wanted to do that. So he clamored for the rematch. So they had the rematch really quick, actually, yeah, right after the first fight. And in the rematch, this fight was at 165. It was also a 10-rounder. So, Jake LaMotta blamed the first fight to the weight issues. So he fought the second fight. I believe it said it was at 165, and Jake LaMotta dropped Sugar Ray Robinson. He dropped him with the hard left hook, I believe, and he continued the whole fight, rushing him and doing volume punches. And it went another 10 rounds, and Robinson lost. He lost that fight. So then they fought 21 days after, in their third fight. They fought because every fight was close. So the third fight, it was close as well. And Jake LaMotta dropped Robinson again. But Robinson was able to do enough to circle around. The second fight was in Detroit, which was basically a homecoming for Sugar Ray because he was from Detroit. But he spent too much time out, hanging around his friends, going out into nightclubs and all this with women. So that's why he lost the second fight. And the third fight, LaMotta picked Detroit because the people had a connection with Jake LaMotta after that second fight. So he chose Detroit for that third fight as well. And that third fight, he dropped Sugar Ray Robinson once again, but Sugar Ray was able to do enough to win the fight. And of course, Jake LaMotta thought that fight was a robbery, that they robbed him. So he clamored for the fourth fight. And they had that fight 2 years later, in 1945. And this is where Sugar Ray Robinson, he was being bull rushed by Jake LaMotta. That was always his plan, to bull rush him, bang him to the body with a lot of body shots, and then come on top. This was kind of Sugar Ray's kryptonite, if you could call it that, because he was such a great fighter and he would rarely lose. Jake LaMotta would bang him to the body, then come on top to the head, and he did that. And it turns out, in one of those exchanges, Sugar Ray Robinson was just putting his hands up and letting LaMotta bang. And after an exchange, he just moved out, like if nothing happened. You know who else did that? Muhammad Ali. That was the first instance of the rope-a-dope. Muhammad Ali was a student of the game. He was a student of Jake LaMotta. Of Sugar Ray Robinson. Believe it. So after that, he pretty much schooled him for the rest of the rounds. He won another 10-rounder. And Jake LaMotta once again felt like he lost the. He felt like he won the fight again. So there needed to be a sixth fight. I mean, a fifth fight. There were 6 fights. This chapter is called A Tale in Six Acts, I think. An opera in 6 acts is what it's called. But they fought their fifth fight in 1945, and Robinson. This was probably Robinson the sharpest that he's been in all the 5 fights that they've had. So this fight was a 12-rounder. Yeah, this fight is a 12-rounder. They fought it like months after their fourth fight, and Robinson took it easy. This fight was watch. This is how they take it easy back then. This fight was in February, and the fifth fight was gonna be in November. So Robinson took it easy, and he fought 3 opponents in the meantime. 3 opponents, and LaMotta, he was like, I'm serious about this. He fought 6 opponents in the meantime, beating every one of them because he really wanted to stay, active and sharp, pretty much. Yeah, this fight, it was the sharpest Sugar Ray ever looked fighting LaMotta, and in fact, in the last 2 rounds, it was a 12-rounder that was supposed to favor Jake LaMotta because he was the pressure fighter, the one that would come on strong later. But it turned out to favor Sugar Ray. And he, in the last 2 rounds, he was giving him a whooping, beating him up. He was all bloodied. But Jake LaMotta was still standing. And thus ends the rivalry for now. So they had that rivalry with each other because none of them could get a title shot. As we know, Robinson got his title shot in 1946, but it was a bit harder for Jake LaMotta. Jake LaMotta kept fighting everybody, but he couldn't get a title shot because he didn't have connections with the mob. Him being Italian American, that was very important at that time. He kept fighting, kept winning, but there was one fight, it was against Billy Fox, where he didn't look so good, and he got knocked out in the 4th round. And it was suspicion that why was he hurt? He said he had a hurt spleen, but later he revealed that he had thrown that fight so he could get a title shot. And he threw that fight so he could get a title shot again. And eventually he did get a title shot against Marcel Cerdan, and he knocked out Cerdan. Cerdan was a Frenchman, and he finally got his championship until 1949. Back in the day, man, these fighters had to beat everybody available because there was only one champion. And even then, they still might not get a title shot. That's how important titles are and were. Because these men fought their whole lives for that chance. That's why I appreciate champions. Anyway, that little rant. So he got that shot, and this was about the time that Sugar Ray Robinson was just dominating the welterweight division. He had many defenses, and he decided, he's like, I think it's ready to move up. I want that middleweight title, because he wanted more money. And it did mean more money. So 1951, Sugar Ray Robinson went up in weight for the 6th fight against Jake LaMotta. And this fight, and he was, before Jake LaMotta was supposed to fight a rematch against Cerdan, but Cerdan died in a accident in a plane crash. So that it'll be important later. That fight never happened. It was never feasible. So Sugar Ray Robinson, he moved up to middleweight to fight Jake LaMotta, and just like the fifth fight, he put a beating on Jake LaMotta. He just seemed stronger and to hit harder once he was a legit middleweight. Now he went up and he beat Jake LaMotta and knocked him out, or TKO in the 13th round. Jake LaMotta was like, you couldn't drop me, man. You couldn't drop me. And he couldn't. But Jake LaMotta's wife at that time, he said that LaMotta could never let that go. He could never let that Sugar Ray Robinson fights go. They always haunted him through the rest of his life. And Jake LaMotta was kind of blackballed after that because he threw that fight and he revealed that. So he was pretty much blackballed by the boxing community. And he that resentfulness just grew and grew and grew, and he just had a rough life as well. And his career just kind of went downhill after that. He never won another title. And he retired a few years after that. But Sugar Ray Robinson was now the middleweight champion of the world. Yeah, you best believe. 2-time world champion. He went to defend his middleweight championship many times. Becoming highly successful. So his popularity grew, and now his wealth was growing because there was now television, and the television networks were paying attention to boxing. And the sixth fight between Jake LaMotta and Robinson, that great rivalry, and not just great because these two men despise each other, but more LaMotta despising Robinson than anything. But it was big because of the cultural aspect of that fight, the Italian American versus African American. It was heat from that. But this was the first nationally televised fight ever. Nationally televised and worldwide. This fight was available in Australia and Europe. So this was the first televised broadcast that was broadcasted throughout the United States and throughout the world as well. Oh, this took Sugar Ray to Europe, and this is why I brought out the Cerdan fight, because when he went to France, he was extremely popular. People loved him all throughout Europe, and they asked him to take his pink Cadillac. He was like, okay, whatever. So he would roam in the streets with this pink Cadillac, and people would just mob him. They're like, whoa. He just had so much love, more love than in the United States, because it seems that in those parts of the world, race wasn't that much of an issue as it was in the United States. I can't explain why, but they just didn't put that much importance into that as we do in the United States, as we did back in those days. So he defended his championship in France. He beat the French champion, and he was pretty relaxed throughout. He wasn't really training his hardest. I think the French champion, yeah, and then he went to Germany, beat the German champion. Like no biggie, no problem. He went to England where people. Oh, I'm sorry. The French loved him because he knocked out Jake LaMotta, and Jake LaMotta beat their fallen hero, Marcel Cerdan, because Cerdan died in that car accident. He never had the chance to redeem himself against Jake LaMotta. So the people identified more with Sugar Ray Robinson now because he beat the guy that beat their guy. So they loved Sugar Ray Robinson. And this is where he fought. He went to England and he fought Randy Turpin. And Randy Turpin's another tragic story. He was I forget what he grew up in, but he had a lot of brothers and they had a rough upbringing too until he fought. And he fought as a good fighter, and he finally got this title shot against Sugar Ray Robinson in England. So he was from England. He was half black, and he fought Sugar Ray Robinson. He was the champion of the English middleweight champion. And Sugar Ray's like, man, I beat the French middleweight champion. I beat the German. This ain't nothing. And he came in with a relaxed attitude, and he lost. His second loss of his career was to Randy Turpin, who's a very good fighter, but he wasn't ready for that fight. It was around that time where people were already telling him that he was past his prime, that he should hang him up, that he just didn't have what it takes anymore. What does he do? He fights Randy Turpin again in the rematch and wins his middleweight championship back. And at that time, Sugar Ray was already contemplating retirement because he saw the bright lights of Hollywood. He saw he saw the musicians and all their glory. He just wanted to perform. But he saw there was also other contenders to fight. So there was Bobo Olsen, who he beat, Rocky Graciano, who he beat, and then he had the dream of the light heavyweight. So he went from middleweight to light heavyweight, and that fight was in Yankee Stadium, and the heat was like 108 degrees, as we probably mostly know that story, right? So he fought that fight, and it was a pretty even fight. Joey Maxim had the right game plan: use his weight, use his body, throw headshots, body shots, everything that he could land, because he was a bigger, stronger guy. But Robinson was winning the fight. But around the 10th round, Robinson, he told the corner, he's like, I feel sleepy. And that's a sign of dehydration when you feel sleepy. So they continued the fight, and in round like 12, he threw a right hand, like a wild right hand, and he just fell. And he got up like, he didn't rush in getting up. And he stumbled to the corner. He stumbled to the wrong corner. Then he went to the right corner. And before the 13th round, or after the 13th round, I believe, the doctor asked him, he's like, what did he ask him? He's like, can you stand up? And Sugar Ray said no. Sugar Ray said he can't. And that's the only time that he got stopped. Sugar Ray never got knocked out. His fight was stopped once in his career. He was never knocked out. So Sugar Ray decides that he's got to retire after that. That he wants to pursue a life of music. So he goes to his friends Miles Davis, Louis Armstrong, Leonard Horn. He's like, I wanna be a singer, a piano singer, or whatever. So he packs his nightclub at first. It's packed with people. He sings in his piano. He makes jokes, and it was packed. And so he toured the world, toured the United States. But after a while, his act got kind of stale because he was not a great musician. He was good at what he did, but he was not a great musician. That wasn't his craft. So he would get bashed by the media for that. And he went to France where people loved him, but they still bashed his music, his singing, his whole routine. And that routine cost him a lot of money because he lost a lot of business at Sugar Ray's because he wasn't there anymore. He wouldn't go. And he wasn't a singer. That cost him a lot of money. He had to pay for the tours. It came out to it came to the point where he would start performing in arena in places that had like 20 people in it. The great Sugar Ray Robinson in front of 20 people. Can you believe that? But that wasn't his craft. People didn't respect him. One of Valet, he would always he's like, all right, do this faster, come faster. And one day that punk pulled a gun on him. Some punk pulled a gun on Sugar Ray Robinson when he was performing. A punk would never do that if he was still in boxing. He's like, oh, he put him in his head. He's like, what did you say? Tell me that last thing. Shoot your brains out. And this one, he just went in to perform, and then of course they took him out. They fired him. I don't know where they took him, but that little performance cost him a lot of money. And after a few years of retirement of trying to he pursued his dreams. He always wanted to get into music as well as boxing and all that, and get away from boxing, but he just wasn't successful at it. And coming home, he was losing business. He went in debt. He had tax problems, as a lot of great boxers have had in the past. And this is when he's like, dude, I need to come back. So he came back to fighting. His first fight was against Joe Rendon, where he knocked him out. But he really didn't convince everyone. Everyone's like, man, you're old. You're not gonna get your middleweight title back. Back then already. But he already had like over 20 years as a pro, Yeah, over 20 years. Easy. Oh, no. Wait. Sugar Ray started his career in 1940. I don't know why I'm saying this 1931. I'm tripping. 1940. I'm looking at BoxRec. I apologize. Anyway, he did not convince anyone. He came back to his fight and he fought Ralph Tiger Jones. And it just looked like he didn't have it. Like he didn't have much. And he lost that 10-rounder, and it looked like Sugar Ray Robinson was past his prime, which he was, but he still showed signs of greatness. But he lost that fight. And one thing that surprised me is he never redeemed that loss. I would have liked him to redeem that loss, but he never did. He clearly lost that fight against Ralph Jones. He came back, was thinking about retirement, went back to the church, Salem Crescent, that pretty much got him out of all that trouble, and just started praying, and he came back, had a few fights, and he's like, dude, I want the title shot. Bobo Olsen was the champion, a fighter that he had already beaten. And they're like, okay, just beat one more guy. And he's like, yeah, I'll beat him. And he fought Rocky Castellani. And he was like not a great fighter, but he was a very tough fighter. And in fact, this guy even dropped him with a hard right hand that he said that he felt like he was hit by a baseball bat. And he dropped him, but he got up, started moving around, boxing him. He won that by split decision. It's like, yes, I finally get my title shot. And he got his title shot against Bobo Olsen. And Bobo Olsen, who he had already beaten before, but he started training once again. He started training as if he was Walker Smith Jr. once again. That's how hard he says he started training. He got that hunger back. He beat Bobo Olsen twice, and he fought Gene Fullmer. And at this point, he was fighting young guns who were in their prime at that time. So Gene Fullmer was in his prime, future Hall of Famer, a legendary fighter. He lost that fight, a 15-round decision. And he came back in the rematch and beat him. But that's the greatness of Sugar Ray Robinson. And that's when he became a 5-time middleweight champion. Sugar Ray Robinson, the first man to win the heavyweight. Oh no, he became a 4-time world champion. This is when he fought Carmen Basilio. And Carmen Basilio, these guys hated each other. These guys actually hated each other. It's just the difference in styles. Carmen Basilio was a mauler, a brawler, and and Sugar Ray would focus more on the boxing of the sweet science. And Robinson would say that he's wild, that he fights like a caveman, and Carmen Basilio would say that all he does is dance and that's not fighting. And so these guys had an actual hatred for each other. So Carmen Basilio, like I said before, Sugar Ray Robinson was the older man now, so he had to beat the young guns now. He lost the first fight. He lost against Carmen Basilio, and then that was like a fight of the year. That was the fight of the year for 1957. And they had a rematch in 1958, which was fight of the year for 1958. These guys had great fights. And he won the rematch, thus becoming 5-time champion of the world. He lost that middleweight championship to Paul Pender in 1960, and he had another fight with Gene Fulmer, a draw, and then he lost in the fourth fight. But he never again got his middleweight title back. He fought as he fought for it, but he became very paranoid with his trainers and his managers. He never trusted authority. Because he felt that they were always robbing him, always trying to get more money from him, always taking his money. But he needed the money. He needed the money because he owed money to the government. He owed tax money and all this stuff. But he was never the same. Yes, he showed signs of greatness, but this wasn't 1948, 1951 anymore. It was times to retire, but he wanted that title. I mean, he was in his 40s already. So he still fought a busy schedule. Watch, I'll just show you. 1963, he fought 10 times. For a guy in his 40s, he fought 10 times. In 1964, he fought 10 times again. So he kept fighting and fighting. And it was kind of sad because he would host training camps and only like 40 people would go. And, from back in the day where hundreds or thousands of people would go just to see him train or visit him in his bar. In his nightclub long being repossessed by the government, because he owed so much money in debt. They took his nightclub went out of business. The lingerie shop went out of business. The barbershop went out of business. His wife left him because he wouldn't spend time with the kids. His kids never knew him. Like, he really never knew his father. It was kind of a circle. What happened to him happened to his kids. So his wife divorced him. He found another woman, Mally, I think her name was. And so she would go to these fights. She was amazed because she never saw the first, when Sugar Ray Robinson was in his prime. He had to fight. Sugar Ray had to get fights like in freaking Tijuana, Mexico. He fought this guy Memo Ayon in Tijuana and he lost. He fought this guy in Honolulu, Hawaii, and he lost. He was fighting all over the place in Virginia. He had to take these fights because he wanted that title once again. But in 1965, November, an old Sugar Ray Robinson, 44 years old, fought Joey Archer. Joey Archer schooled an old Sugar Ray Robinson. And he said, I said before the fight that if I lost to Joey Archer, that I was going to retire. And he retired after this. After this, a few months later, they did a huge memory for him back in New York. A huge, a retirement party where all the great fighters, Joe Louis, Randy Turpin, Carmen Basilio, Gene Foreman, all his greatest rivals were there. It's just Jake LaMotta wasn't there. Why? Because Jake LaMotta was blackballed, like I said. Jake LaMotta was sort of hated in boxing circles because of him throwing the fights and him kind of being antisocial. He's like, man, I'm the first man to lick him. Why am I not invited? And he lived like 10 blocks away from the stadium too. I believe it was Madison Square Garden. He lived like 10 blocks away. But they did not invite him. So they did this, and he became a sort of humanitarian after that. He moved to LA because his wife, I guess she was from there, and she missed it. And so they moved back to LA, and that's where he's like, I needed something to help people, and became a humanitarian. He started his own recreation center because he said he saw all these Walker Smith Juniors in the streets. Some kids that grow up unloved, and without a father and stuff like that. So he said, I'm going to get them out of the streets. And some of those kids became like Olympic athletes. Some of them became mayors. So he did take them out of the streets, and he did help the kids a lot. And he dedicated probably the rest of his life on that, even though he wasn't wealthy anymore. He didn't have that much money, but he said that's the happiest he had ever been, and his wife also said that's the happiest she had ever seen him as well. So Sugar Ray ended his life on that high note pretty much, and his wife found him dead in 1989. His cause of death was to heart failure. They had a big memoriam for him. Greats like Jake LaMotta went to his funeral. Kenny Norton, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali said that he learned so many things from the great Sugar Ray Robinson. And just all these great memories. And his legacy will always stay because he was one of the first fighters to show that elegance in the ring, that beautiful boxing in the ring. And the authors stated, like, to say he's pound for pound greatest fighter, that's just too simplistic. You have to analyze like his style and what he brought to boxing. That's what makes Sugar Ray Robinson so great. Not only did he bring that to boxing, but he had such a great career, and he wasn't afraid to fight everybody because he wanted greatness. That's why he fought Joey Maxim, because he dreamt of greatness. He wanted to be a 3-time world champion, just like his hero Henry Armstrong. But he did not achieve that. Joey Maxim did not want to rematch him, and that's why he retired in the first time. But yeah, definitely a great book. I know this review is really long. This is definitely my longest video I've ever made. So, but anyway, thank you for watching, and go ahead and pick up this book. Minor. I said that one thing about the author running off a little bit, but he always goes back. So that's a minor thing. For that, I'll probably give this a book like an A-, like a 90%. But, it's definitely worth picking up. I found this, like I said, with my Jack Johnson book. I found this in the library. So look up in your library or go ahead and buy it. It's definitely a book that I would go back and read just to check everybody's stories. I know I missed a lot from this book. This review is long, but I still missed a lot from the book. It's just so much information. A really good book. And once again, thank you, Chayo L, for suggesting this book. And I'm going to start reading Hands of Stone, the Roberto Duran story. So look out for that one. In about a month. I'm a little bit of a slow reader, but anyway, once again, thanks for watching and have a great day. Peace. Also, I how do you say it? I want to suggest for everybody that loves boxing to just study it, study the history, so we could know and appreciate boxing even more. Boxing is more than just, you know, these divas that we got today, these promotional companies, this everything. It's so much more. You got trailblazers, you got history makers like Sugar Ray Robinson, who got TV deals, who said, if you don't pay me more, I'm a walk. You got guys like these, or Jack Johnsons, or Joe Lewis's. So study the history, guys. Study the history. And there's always something to study about. Always. All right. Peace.